Elias Thorne did not believe in coincidences. 22 years as a lead investigator for the Major Crimes Division had stripped him of that luxury, replacing it with a cynical, cold-blooded hypervigilance. In his world, a coincidence was just a poorly camouflaged lead, a frayed thread in a tapestry of lies, or the precursor to a tactical disaster. That morning, the disaster didn't arrive with a bang or a siren. It arrived with the mundane smell of expensive Turkish tobacco and a brand of arrogance that Elias had mistakenly labeled brotherhood for 2 decades. He stood in his kitchen, his fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug of coffee, black, bitter, and hot enough to scald the tongue. Outside, Chicago was a bruised purple smudge on the horizon, the wind whistling through the microscopic cracks of his suburban fortress, rattling the window panes like a ghost begging for entry. But Elias's eyes were not on the weather. They were fixed on the kitchen island, where a single object lay under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the LED light. It was a cufflink. Heavy, 18-karat white gold, shaped into the intricate, macabre design of 2 vipers entwining a obsidian-encrusted dagger. Elias knew that design with a haunting familiarity. He had commissioned it himself 3 years ago as a 40th birthday gift for his best friend, Julian Vane. Julian was the man who had been his partner on the force when they were both young and idealistic. Julian was the man who had held the door open while Elias carried his father's casket in the pouring rain. Julian had become such a permanent fixture at the Thorne dinner table that he had his own designated chair and a key to the front door. "The serpent's knot," Elias whispered. His voice was a dry, skeletal rasp, sounding like dead leaves skittering across frozen pavement. A symbol of eternal loyalty. My God, the irony is thick enough to choke on. He hadn't found the gold piece on a dresser or tucked safely into a jewelry box. He had found it at the bottom of the laundry hamper, snagged deep in the delicate black lace of his wife Clara's favorite silk slip. It was a forensic fingerprint left in the one place Julian Vane should never have been undressing, the master bedroom of the man he called his brother. Elias didn't scream. He didn't storm upstairs to wake Clara, who was currently cocooned in their high-thread Count Egyptian cotton sheets, smelling of lavender, expensive gin, and betrayal. Instead, he sat down at the wooden table and began to do what he had been trained to do better than anyone in the state. He started an active case file. In the silent theater of his mind, the past 6 months began to rewind and play back in high-definition slow motion. He remembered the way Julian would drop by on Friday nights with a bottle of scotch just as Elias was leaving for a late-night security consult. He remembered the subtle tectonic shift in Clara's laughter. It had become sharper, more performative, a jagged edge disguised as joy. He remembered the art history classes she had suddenly enrolled in every Tuesday and Thursday, the exact nights Julian claimed to be working private security details for a local shipping magnate on the north side. Every favor, every brotherly check-in, every shared beer and weekend barbecue was now a data point in an emerging pattern of treachery. He realized with a sickening jolt that Julian hadn't been visiting him. Julian had been scouting him, checking the perimeter of his life to see exactly how much he could steal before the alarms went off. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a secondary encrypted phone. He didn't call a divorce lawyer. Not yet. Lawyers were for people who wanted a settlement. Elias wanted a reckoning. He called a ghost from his past. "Leo," Elias said when the encrypted line finally picked up on the 4th ring. "I need the old toolkit. The off-the-books hardware. I'm sending you a MAC address and a license plate. I want every ping, every deleted text, every cloud-synced photo, and every GPS coordinate from the last 90 days. I want their digital souls laid bare on my desk." Leo, a former digital forensic specialist whom Elias had once cleared of a federal hacking charge in exchange for his unofficial services, didn't ask questions. He knew that tone of voice. It was the tone Elias used right before someone's world stopped spinning. "Give me 6 hours, boss. I'll peel them like an orange." Elias spent those 6 hours in his home office, a room Clara rarely entered because it smelled too much like work. He felt a strange, cold detachment settling over him, the investigator's chill. It was a psychological defense mechanism he'd used for decades when surveying grisly crime scenes or dissecting the motives of sociopaths. He wasn't a husband right now. He wasn't a friend. He was a predator tracking a scent through a forest of lies. By noon, the first massive data dump arrived via a secure server. Leo had bypassed the encryption on Clara's cloud backup drive with surgical precision. The messages were a visceral punch to the gut, more painful than any physical blow Elias had ever taken in a dark alley. They weren't just about sex, they were about scorn. They were a manifesto of disrespect. He's so predictable, Jules. One text from Clara Reed, sent only 3 days ago while Elias was downstairs fixing the kitchen sink. He thinks he's so sharp, but he can't even see what's happening in his own bed. He's becoming a ghost of himself. A boring, dutiful ghost. The old man is past his prime, Julian had replied with a digital smirk. Let him play with his files and his pension. While he's guarding the front door like a loyal dog, I'm the one with the key to the master suite. 20 years of friendship, and he never suspected I'd want the one trophy he prizes most. Elias stared at the screen until the words burned into his retinas. The betrayal went back much further than 6 months. According to the metadata on the oldest recovered photos, vile, intimate shots taken in Elias's own study, it had been going on for nearly 3.5 years. Every holiday, every birthday, every family outing where Julian had toasted to Elias's health had been a calculated stage play where Elias was the only actor who didn't know the script. But as Elias dug deeper into Julian's digital footprint, the investigator in him found something even more explosive, something that moved this beyond a mere domestic dispute. Julian wasn't just stealing Elias's wife. He was a parasite feeding on the very community that trusted him. Julian Vane was a serial predator of lives. Through his private security firm, Vane Vanguard, he had gained intimate access to the private lives of the city's most powerful men. He was currently carrying out simultaneous affairs with the wives of 3 other heavy hitters: Marcus Sterling, a ruthless real estate mogul who owned half the skyline; Viktor Volkov, a mountain of a man who served as a high-ranking official in the Longshoremen's Union; and Arthur Penhaligon, a top-tier criminal defense attorney known for making inconvenient people disappear through legal loopholes. Worse, Julian was using Clara's boutique, art gallery, as a sophisticated front to launder kickbacks from a construction racketeering scheme he was running in the South Side. He was skimming from the men he called his clients and sleeping with the women he called his friends' wives. You didn't just break my heart, Julian, Elias muttered, his eyes as cold and gray as a winter Atlantic. You built a temple of glass and invited me to orchestrate the demolition. Elias began to orchestrate the burn. He knew that a simple confrontation in the living room would lead to a messy, expensive divorce and Julian probably slipping away to a non-extradition country with a suitcase full of laundered cash. That wasn't enough. Elias wanted total erasure. He wanted them to feel the walls closing in, to experience the specific terror of a trapped animal realizing the exit has been welded shut. He reached out to the 3 men Julian had crossed. He didn't reveal his identity at first. He sent anonymous evidence packets to their private servers. A high-resolution photo here, a suspicious bank statement there, a recording of a hushed phone call. He planted the seeds of doubt until they were screaming for blood. Then he stepped in as the concerned friend, who had also just discovered the truth. I have a location, Elias told Marcus Sterling over a secure burner line. Friday night, 10 p.m. The old Blackwood Ironworks on the south side. I've lured Julian there under the guise of a hush money payment to keep my mouth shut about his laundering. If you want to see the man who's been laughing at your dignity for 3 years, be there. And bring the others. We're going to have a board meeting he'll never forget. The location was a monolithic structure of rusted steel and shattered glass, the Blackwood Ironworks. It was a place Elias's grandfather had worked in decades ago, now a hollowed-out shell in a derelict industrial district where the city lights didn't reach and the police didn't venture without a tactical team. Elias arrived 4 hours early, moving through the shadows with the practiced ease of a man who had conducted 100 stings. He rigged the space like a grand theater of retribution. He set up high-output industrial work lights on a remote trigger, aimed to blind anyone in the center of the floor. He installed a directional microphone system hidden in the rusted vats so every sob and whisper would be amplified through the warehouse's decaying rafters. He even placed a single uncomfortable wooden chair in the center of the concrete floor, directly under a dangling heavy-duty industrial hook. At 9:30 p.m. Clara arrived. She was expecting a surprise anniversary gala, at a secret pop-up location Elias had been teasing for weeks. She was dressed in a breathtaking black cocktail dress that cost more than a small car, her heels clicking nervously against the grimy oil-stained concrete. Elias? It's freezing in here. Is this some kind of avant-garde joke? She called out, her voice thin and echoing against the metal walls. Elias sat in the absolute darkness of the mezzanine, watching her through a thermal scope. He felt nothing, no love, no hate, just the clinical satisfaction of a trap snapping shut on a target. At 9:45 p.m., Julian's black Range Rover pulled up, gravel crunching under its tires. He entered the building with his usual predatory swagger, though his eyes were narrow, and he was gripping a leather briefcase tightly. He thought he was here to pay off a whistleblower who had found out about his racketeering scheme. He thought he was in control. When Julian saw Clara standing in the dim light of the center floor, he stopped dead. "Clara? What the hell are you doing here? Is this the whistleblower? Julian? Elias said this was for our anniversary. Why do you have a briefcase?" Before the realization could fully dawn on them, Elias hit the remote trigger. 6 massive industrial floodlights exploded into life, bathing the center of the warehouse in a blinding, white-hot glare. Simultaneously, the massive steel rolling doors at both ends of the hall slammed shut with a thunderous, metallic boom, the heavy automatic bolts sliding into place with a definitive, bone-chilling clack. "Welcome to the end of the line," Elias's voice boomed over the high-wattage PA system, distorted and echoing like a judge from a higher circle of hell. He stepped out onto the rusted metal catwalk looking down at them. His shadow was cast long and terrifying across the floor. "Elias, open this door right now," Julian shouted, his hand instinctively reaching for the small of his back where he usually carried a sidearm, only to find it missing. Elias had lifted it from his car an hour earlier. "This is kidnapping. You're a man of the law, Elias. You can't do this." "I'm a retired man of the law, Julian," Elias replied, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And tonight I'm not the one you should be worried about. I'm just the moderator." From the deep shadows of the towering shipping containers at the far end of the hall, 3 silhouettes emerged into the light. Marcus Sterling, Victor Volkov, and Arthur Penhaligon. They didn't look like the refined professionals Julian knew. They looked like a firing squad. "Julian Vane," Marcus said, his voice a low, vibrating growl of pure venom. "I hear you've been taking very good care of my wife and my offshore accounts. We thought it was time for an audit." Julian's face went from pale to a sickly, translucent white. He looked at Clara, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and the dawning realization that her husband wasn't a boring ghost. He was the man who had just built her a cage. "Elias, please," Clara sobbed, clutching her pearls until the strings snapped, white spheres scattering across the dirty floor. "We can talk about this. It was a mistake. I was lonely." "A 20-year friendship and a 3-year affair, Clara?" Elias asked, his voice echoing through the rafters. "That's not a mistake. That's a career. But tonight the company is going bankrupt. And everyone is here to collect their debt." Elias watched as the 3 men closed the circle around his former best friend. The air in the warehouse grew thick with the metallic scent of ozone and the heavy, suffocating weight of impending violence. The prologue was over. The trial of Julian Vane was about to begin. The atmosphere inside the Blackwood Iron Works shifted from frozen shock to a kinetic, suffocating heat. Julian Vane stood at the center of the floodlights, his $4,000 suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. To his left, Clara was trembling so violently that the clicking of her heels against the concrete sounded like telegraph code. Surrounding them were 3 men who represented the peak of Chicago's power, and right now they represented its wrath. Elias remained on the catwalk, a silent observer in the rafters. He adjusted a dial on his console, and the directional microphones picked up the wet, ragged sound of Julian's breathing. "Elias, let's be reasonable," Julian called out, his eyes darting toward Victor Volkov. Victor was a man who had personally broken Strikes and Bones in the 90s. He wasn't someone you negotiated with while trapped in a box. "You've got your proof. You want a divorce? Fine. You want the firm? It's yours. Just open the doors." "You still think this is a negotiation, Julian?" Elias's voice drifted down, cool and detached. "You spent 3 years treating my life like a buffet. You took what you wanted, mocked the host, and expected to leave without a check. But Marcus, Victor, and Arthur, they aren't as patient as I am." Marcus Sterling stepped forward first. The real estate mogul was usually a man of calculated grace, but his face was now a mask of raw, aristocratic fury. He threw a thick manila folder at Julian's feet. Photos spilled out, Marcus's wife, Elena, entering a hotel room with Julian. Time-stamped logs of Julian using Marcus's own private jet for weekend trysts. "You didn't just sleep with my wife, you parasite," Marcus hissed. "You used my security clearance to bypass the audit on the West Side development. You funneled $6 million into a shell company registered in Clara's name. Did she tell you that, Elias? Your wife is the CEO of a money laundering operation." Clara gasped, looking at the documents. I just signed what he told me. He said it was for the gallery's expansion." "Ignorance isn't a defense in my courtroom, Clara." Arthur Penhaligon, the defense attorney, stepped into the light. He didn't look angry, he looked lethal. Julian, you tried to bug my office. You thought you could get leverage on me by recording my conversations with my wife. You forgot one thing. I know how to bury people so deep that even God can't find them. And I've already filed the paperwork to disbar you and freeze every asset Vanguard owns. Viktor Volkov didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply walked up to Julian and grabbed him by the lapels of his jacket, lifting him nearly off the floor. My wife is pregnant, Julian, Viktor growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the microphones. And I found the text. You told her to get rid of it because it would complicate our schedule. You told my wife to kill my child. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Clara's sobbing. I didn't know she was pregnant when I said that, Julian stammered, his feet dangling. Viktor, listen. Viktor didn't listen. He delivered a short, brutal punch to Julian's midsection. Julian folded like a lawn chair, gasping for air as he hit the concrete. Elias, stop them. Clara screamed, rushing toward the catwalk, looking up at the silhouette of her husband. He's going to kill him. Maybe, Elias replied. Or maybe he'll just give him the attention he's been seeking for 20 years. You always said I was boring and predictable, Clara. You said I didn't have enough fire in me. Well, here's the fire. Enjoy the warmth. For the next 20 minutes, the warehouse became a chamber of cold, systematic retribution. It wasn't a chaotic brawl, it was an audit. Every time Julian tried to crawl away, one of the men was there to drive a heel into his ribs or a fist into his jaw. They stripped him of his dignity one blow at a time, forcing him to admit to every lie, every theft, and every betrayal. Elias watched it all through the monitors. He saw the blood smear across the floor, the same floor where his grandfather had once earned an honest living. He saw Julian's expensive watch shatter under Viktor's boot. He saw Clara sink to her knees, realizing that the exciting life Julian had promised her was nothing but a tomb of his making. The best part, Julian, Elias said, his voice cutting through the sounds of the scuffle, is that I didn't have to break a single law tonight. I didn't touch you. I didn't even lie to these men. I simply showed them the truth. You're a man of shadows, Julian. You thrive when people don't look too closely. But under these lights? You're just a small, broken man who tried to play a game he didn't understand. Julian lay in a heap, his eyes swelling shut, his breathing a wet whistle. He looked up at Marcus. Please? Marcus, we were friends. Friends? Marcus spat on him. I've already called your wife, Julian. Elena is at your house right now with a moving van and a team of locksmiths. She's also the one who gave Elias the password to your private server. She's been helping him for weeks. That was the final blow. The realization that even his own wife had turned against him under Elias's guidance broke whatever was left of Julian's spirit. Elias pressed a button, and the directional mic in front of Clara hummed. Clara, look at him. That's the man you traded 20 years of marriage for. That's the man who mocked me in your bed. Does he look like he's worth the price of your soul? Clara looked at the battered, groveling Julian, then up at the darkness where Elias sat. Elias, please. Take me home. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I am taking you home, Clara, Elias said. But not to our house. I've already had your things moved to that studio apartment you liked so much, the one you used for your art classes. The locks on our home have been changed. The joint accounts are emptied and moved into a trust for the victims of Julian's racketeering. You're free, Clara. Just like you wanted. He turned the lights up to maximum intensity, the glare becoming blinding. Victor, Marcus, Arthur, Elias called out. I believe the audit is complete. The doors are unlocked. I suggest you go home to your wives and decide what's left to save. Julian and Clara, they aren't worth any more of your time. The three men looked at the broken heap on the floor. The fury had been spent, replaced by a grim, hollow exhaustion. One by one they turned and walked toward the exiting doors, leaving Julian and Clara alone in the circle of light. Elias stood up from his console. He felt a strange weightlessness, as if a heavy armor he'd been wearing for decades had finally been stripped away. He descended the stairs, his boots echoing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He walked into the light, stopping 5 feet from Julian. He looked down at the man who had been his brother. 20 years, Julian, Elias said softly. I would have died for you. And that was your greatest weapon. You knew I wouldn't look for a knife in my own back if I thought your hand was on the hilt. Julian coughed, spitting blood. You think you won, Elias? Look at you. You're alone. You've destroyed everything. No, Elias said, glancing at the shattered white gold cufflink he held in his hand. He dropped it onto Julian's chest. I've cleared the land. Now I can finally build something honest. He turned to Clara, who was watching him with wide, terrified eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. Elias walked out of the Blackwood Iron Works, leaving the lights on and the doors wide open. He stepped into the cool Chicago rain, the water washing the scent of the warehouse from his skin. Behind him, the floodlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows of the two people who had tried to ruin him. He got into his truck, checked his watch and realized it was almost midnight. For the first time in 3 years, Elias Thorne was going home to a house that was finally quiet. But the burn wasn't over. There was still the matter of the courthouse. And Elias Thorne always finished what he started. The echoes of the warehouse confrontation faded into the sterile, fluorescent silence of the Cook County Courthouse. For Elias Thorne, the physical violence of the Blackwood Iron Works had been a necessary purge, but the legal dismantling was the true masterpiece. He had always been a man of paperwork and fine print. He knew that while a punch might bruise the ego, a gavel could erase a life. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the floodlights. Elias sat on a polished mahogany bench in the hallway of the Domestic Relations Division, his posture as straight and unyielding as a structural beam. In his lap sat a thick leather portfolio. It didn't just contain evidence of infidelity, it contained the autopsy of 2 reputations. The heavy double doors swung open, and Clara emerged with her attorney, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide the look of defeat etched into his face. Clara looked haggard. The sleek cocktail dresses and pearls had been replaced by a conservative gray suit, her eyes sunken and rimmed with a bitter red. She spotted Elias and stopped, her hands trembling as she clutched her handbag. "Are you happy now, Elias?" she hissed, her voice loud enough to make a passing clerk glance their way. "You've frozen my cards. You've turned every friend we had against me. You're trying to leave me on the street." Elias didn't stand. He didn't even look up at first. He simply turned a page in his folder. "I'm not trying to leave you on the street, Clara. I'm simply ensuring you receive exactly what you contributed to this marriage. Based on the forensic accounting of the last 3 years, that amount is roughly 0. In fact, considering the funds you helped Julian siphon from my firm, you actually owe the estate." "That was Julian. I didn't know." "In the eyes of the law, signatures matter more than intent," Elias said, finally meeting her gaze with eyes that felt like liquid nitrogen. "And you signed every shell company filing with a smile." Her attorney stepped in, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "Mr. Thorne, my client is prepared to settle for 30% of the pension and the vacation property. We can end this today without the judge seeing this more theatrical recordings from the warehouse." Elias gave a short, mirthless laugh. "You think I'm afraid of those recordings? I'm the one who submitted them to the court as evidence of a hostile domestic environment and conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge has already seen them. Why do you think your settlement offer went from 50% to a plea for mercy in less than an hour?" Before the attorney could respond, the bailiff called them back into the courtroom. The proceedings were a cold, surgical execution. Julian Vane was not present. He was currently being held in a federal detention center pending bail on charges of racketeering and wire fraud, charges Elias had hand-delivered to the district attorney's office the morning after the audit. The judge, a formidable woman named Gwendolyn Vance, peered over her spectacles at the mountain of evidence Elias had compiled. There were GPS logs showing Julian's Range Rover parked at the Thorne residence over 400 times in 36 months. There were recordings of Julian and Clara laughing about Elias's retirement hobbies, while lying in his bed. But the final nail in the coffin was the financial trail. Elias's forensic expert, Leo, had traced the $6 million Marcus Sterling had mentioned. It hadn't just been laundered, it had been used to buy a villa in Marbella, Spain, under the names Julian and Clara Vane. They hadn't just been having an affair, they had been planning a funeral for Elias's life, intending to flee as soon as the last cent was milked from his accounts. Judge Vance leaned forward, her gaze settling on Clara. "Mrs. Thorne, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a betrayal this calculated or a deception this profound. You didn't just violate a marriage contract, you engaged in a criminal conspiracy against your spouse." The ruling was a total scorched earth victory. Because of the at-fault clause and the overwhelming evidence of criminal financial misconduct, Clara was stripped of any claim to Elias's pension. The house, which had been in Elias's family for 2 generations, remained his. The joint savings were seized to pay back the investors Julian had defrauded, including Marcus and Victor, effectively leaving Clara with nothing but her personal belongings and a mountainous legal bill. As the gavel struck the sounding block, the sound was final. Like the slamming of the warehouse doors, but permanent. Elias stood up and buttoned his blazer. He walked past Clara without a word, ignoring the sob she let out as her lawyer tried to explain that they had no grounds for appeal. Outside on the courthouse steps, the Chicago air was crisp, carrying the scent of impending winter. A familiar black sedan pulled up to the curb. Marcus Sterling rolled down the window. His face was still bruised around the cheekbone, but his eyes were clear. "It's done?" Marcus asked. "It's done," Elias replied. "Julian's looking at 15 to 20 years, Marcus said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Victor and Simon are satisfied. We're all moving on. What about you, Elias? What does a man do when he's finally cleared the brush?" Elias looked out at the city skyline, the steel and glass gleaming in the pale sunlight. "I think I'll take a long drive. Somewhere where I don't know the neighbors and the coffee doesn't taste like stale routine." "You're a hell of a hunter, Thorne," Marcus said, nodding. "The city's a little quieter with Julian behind bars. Take care of yourself." The sedan pulled away, leaving Elias alone on the sidewalk. He saw a figure limping toward a bus stop a block away. It was Julian's former wife, Elena. She had been the one who provided the final passwords. She stopped and looked at Elias, giving him a singular, respectful nod. Two survivors of the same storm. Elias walked to his own truck. He reached into his pocket and felt the small, heavy weight of the serpent's knot cufflink. He walked to the edge of the Chicago River, which flowed gray and turgid beneath the bridge. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the white gold piece into the water. It vanished without a splash, swallowed by the silt and the cold. He climbed into his truck and started the engine. For the first time in 20 years there was no one to check in with. No Tuesday art classes to ignore. No fake laughter to endure. He put the truck in gear and headed toward the interstate. The past was a pile of ash in a South Side warehouse, and the future was a blank ledger. Elias Thorne, the man who believed in patterns, was finally ready to draw a new one. The rearview mirror showed the courthouse shrinking into the distance, a monument to a life he had outgrown. He turned on the radio, something loud, something new, and drove until the city was nothing but a memory in his wake.